Imagine this. You're jolted awake by the grinding thunder of cement trucks, tearing apart a creek that's flowed behind your home since before the Civil War. Diesel fumes mingle with the sharp tang of pulverized limestone as you watch $80,000 of your HOA dues disappear into what used to be a pristine, glassy mountain stream. It's for flood control, proclaims HOA President Brenda Hartwell from the comfort of her spotless white Tesla. What the smiling real estate queen didn't realize was that I'm a retired Army Corps hydrologist and she'd just set off a slow-motion disaster. Jump ahead 6 months. Brenda's million-dollar showpiece of a home is sitting in 2 feet of stagnant water, its foundation splitting apart, while my beat-up little property remains high and dry. The FBI is knocking at her front door, and the concrete channel she championed is about to drain more than just the crickets about to drain her life. Don't tell me. What would you do if your HOA siphoned your money to wreck your sanctuary? Where are you watching this from? I'll bet your own neighbors have tried something just as outrageous. I'm Dale Brennan. I'm 58. And until half a year ago, I figured my biggest frustration was tracking down carburetor parts for a '72 Harley. Turns out I was way off. The real danger to my peace wasn't a hard-to-find motorcycle part, it was an HOA president who thought her real estate license made her a hydroengineering expert. I inherited 2 acres of heaven from my grandfather, back when this part of Colorado was just pasture land, and HOA meant herd of Angus. My grandfather, William Brennan, was a combat engineer who made it through Normandy, then came home to create something beautiful. This creek was his therapy. For 3 years after retiring from the Army Corps, I started every day the same way: coffee on the porch, listening to Cottonwood Creek chatter over smooth granite stones. The scent of motor oil from my workshop mingling with damp willow bark. Gravel paths my grandfather laid in '48 crunched under my boots. Martha, my wife of 26 years, teaches 4th grade patient as they come, which she'd need for what was ahead. Our kids, gone in different directions. Jessica's a trauma nurse in Portland. Mike's debugging software in Austin. Both inherited Grandpa's stubborn streak. But what really made this land special wasn't the old ranch house or the shop crammed with vintage motorcycle parts. It was 400 yards of creek, with water rights that dated back to 1873. Older than Colorado's statehood. Older than electricity. Older than any HOA queen with a superiority complex than Willowbrook. Estates sprang up like luxury mushrooms after a rainstorm. 47 homes, averaging $900,000 apiece. Mostly California transplants, fleeing their own HOA nightmares. The irony was thicker than fog on the creek. Enter Brenda Hartwell, 52, newly crowned ruler of suburbia, straight out of Marin County. With that lethal blend of arrogance and ignorance that comes from selling overpriced houses to desperate buyers. She drove a white Tesla with SOLD for you plates and wore her pearl earrings like armor. Her investment banker husband commuted to Denver. Their kids went to a private school that probably taught them folks like me were financially disadvantaged. Instead of people with different priorities, their $1.2 million colonial stopped where my Wild Creek began. The first shot she fired came on a Tuesday that smelled of fresh coffee and future legal fees. A certified letter on HOA violation notice claiming unsightly storage of automotive parts visible from neighboring properties, with a fine of $200 a day until corrected. One small problem for her: my land predates the HOA by 80 years. My deed includes mineral rights, water rights, and a legally locked-in exemption from future development restrictions. They figured the old mechanic wouldn't know the law. Face-off went, as you might imagine. Her office smelled of vanilla candles and privilege. She offered that rehearsed, real-to-mirror practiced smile, and hinted I might be happier living somewhere with more flexible property standards. Translation: somewhere poorer. I answered with my own certified letter, pointing out that HOA covenants don't touch grandfathered properties. Her counterpunch: anonymous complaints to the county accusing me of running an illegal business, because, apparently, repairing motorcycles is suspicious to those who outsource oil changes. The building inspector combed through my shop for 2 hours, found nothing except my questionable organization, and still cost me $1,200 in legal fees to prove I wasn't running a chop shop. But she was just testing the water, literally. The real fight began when she learned I held water rights. In Colorado, water means leverage. And in Brenda's view, guys with grease-stained hands shouldn't have either. That spring, the snowmelt made Cottonwood Creek roar over the Beaver Dam upstream. It should have been peaceful. Instead, it became the soundtrack to her next move, hiring a Denver law firm, Petton and Associates, specialists in environmental property disputes, which is code for weaponizing regulations, to gut your neighbor's rights. They filed a nuisance complaint claiming my section of creek created dangerous runoff that could flood the million-dollar homes downstream. They wanted to force me into a $50,000 environmental impact study. When Martha found me that evening, neat in the creek with my grandfather's old survey rod, she asked what I was thinking. I'm thinking Brenda's lawyers just made a $50,000 mistake, I said. 30 years in the Army Corps taught me something. Lawyers bank on environmental rules sounding too complex for regular folks. They forget some of us wrote those rules. My old colleague Pete Morrison at the Colorado Water Authority spotted the flaw in 10 minutes. Their case relied on watershed maps from 1967, long before the interstate, upstream subdivisions, and modern storm drains changed everything. Real data proved my creek actually reduced flooding by storing runoff naturally, thanks to those granite boulders my grandfather placed decades ago. And Colorado's first in time, first in right water law meant my 1873 rights beat theirs outright forever. I spent the weekend surrounded by Grandpa's notebooks and county maps, preparing a counterclaim. Monday morning, I filed it demanding they pay for a proper assessment, backed by Pete's proof that their subdivision worsened downstream flooding. The county water commissioner, Rodriguez, took one look and laughed. "Mr. Brennan," he said, "they tried to school a hydrologist on water flow using maps from the Johnson administration. This might be the fastest water rights case ever." 2 weeks later, I won outright. The HOA was ordered to drop all water-related harassment, and my historical rights were confirmed in legal stone. The local paper ran the headline, "HOA challenges century-old water rights, loses spectacularly." Soon, neighbors showed up with their own Brenda horror stories, petty violations, ridiculous fines, even threats over mailbox styles. That night, by the creek, Martha asked where this water belonged. I smiled, listening to the creek murmur through Brenda's perfect kingdom. But she didn't take the hint. 3 weeks later, while we were on our first vacation in years visiting Jessica, she held an emergency HOA meeting, notice sent to an old address where she presented doctored erosion photos, courtesy of a cousin's landscaping company, to justify pouring concrete into my creek. The $127,000 plan passed, funded by a $1,800 emergency flood control assessment on each homeowner. Edwin Kowalski, the lone dissenting vote, called me that night. "Dale, this woman is crazy. Something smells like fish left in the sun too long. I cut our trip short, driving through the night with Martha dozing beside me, white-knuckling the wheel and calculating just how much damage they could cause in 3 days. Turns out the answer was a lot. That the noise hit me first, the rumble of diesel engines and the relentless pounding of jackhammers, where early morning bird songs once lived. Then came the smell, a sharp mix of pulverized concrete dust and crushed vegetation, all under a blanket of diesel fumes that lingered in the valley like man-made fog. When I turned the corner toward my driveway, I saw what Brenda had done to a century and a half of untouched beauty. My creek was gone. In its place was a lifeless strip of concrete, a harsh grey channel that could have doubled as a prison drainage ditch. The crystal-clear mountain water that once danced over polished stones now sloshed through an 18-inch deep industrial gutter, something you'd expect to see in an abandoned city lot. Not in the heart of the Colorado Rockies. The boulders my grandfather had positioned with such care were smothered beneath tons of cement. Generations of fish-spawning grounds, older than the state itself, had been obliterated. Martha stood beside me, tears cutting lines down her cheeks. "They killed it," she whispered. "They actually killed a living creek." Here's the thing about spending 30 years as a hydrologist navigating environmental law. You start to think the way water thinks. And water, it always the truth, eventually. For the next week, I documented everything. Photos from every angle, water flow readings, samples for lab analysis. I also dug into Pinnacle Construction, the outfit responsible for the work. Their history was a goldmine of violations. 3 separate EPA infractions in just 5 years. $75,000 in fines for illegal waterway alterations. And a habit of breaking ground before getting permits. And that's the key point. Most property owners don't realize any major alteration to a natural waterway needs clearance from 3 different levels: the county, the state's environmental office, and often the EPA. It's a legal 3-layer cake. And Brenda's crew had skipped every single layer. The Clean Water Act does not play around. Federal penalties can run $25,000 a day, with Colorado tacking on another $10,000 daily. I didn't need a calculator to know. Every day that concrete sat there meant $35,000 more in potential fines. I filed complaints with everyone who had jurisdiction: county code enforcement, the state EPA, and the federal EPA's Region 8 in Denver. I also called the local Trout Unlimited chapter. Their president nearly had a stroke when I explained what had happened to the spawning sites. "Mr. Brennan, this is exactly the kind of habitat destruction we've been fighting for 2 decades, he told me. "We'll back you legally, financially, technically, whatever it takes. This isn't just an attack on your creek. It's a declaration of war on every fish in Colorado." The pushback came fast. Within 10 days, 3 separate agencies were on the case. An environmental law clinic from the University of Colorado had offered free legal help, and I had enough evidence to drown Peton and Associates in paperwork. But Brenda wasn't finished. Edwin Kowalski tipped me off. She was planning an even bigger assault, a flood control system that would encase the entire creek in concrete from the county road to the subdivision's edge. Her logic: if we're doing it, let's do it right. That night, I sat in my workshop, surrounded by my grandfather's engineering notebooks from the 1950s, flipping through old black-and-white photos of the natural creek system. The man had designed a masterpiece, a flood-proof solution that had worked flawlessly for 70 years. Brenda had demolished it in 3 days. But, in doing so, she'd handed me enough federal violations to see her behind bars. 3 weeks later, I was in a real estate office at 7 a.m., facing Brenda across a gleaming glass desk. The place smelled of vanilla candles and fear sweat. "Dale," she began, sliding a manila envelope toward me. "I think we started off on the wrong foot. This whole thing's been unfortunate." Inside, a cashier's check for $500,000 and a non-disclosure agreement thicker than my grandfather's manuals. The terms: take the cash, never speak publicly about the creek, move out of the county within 6 months, and hand over my water rights to the HOA. She didn't bother to hide the threat. "Lawsuits are expensive, Dale. Even when you win, you lose. Think about Martha's job." I'd brought a small digital recorder, legal in Colorado's single-party consent law. And her next words were priceless. "If you turn this down, I'll make sure everyone in this valley knows you're an anti-development extremist. I've got deep real estate connections. Your wife's teaching job could get complicated." That same week, my workshop was vandalized again. This time, they didn't bother being discreet. Tools gone, vintage motorcycle parts scattered, my restored '72 Sportster knocked over with sugar in the gas tank. Their mistake: I had new security cameras. They caught everything, including a white Tesla idling at the end of my driveway. At 2a.m. the harassment ramped up daily. Anonymous online reviews attacked Martha's after-school tutoring business. Someone called her principal with concerns about her political leanings. The stress wore us down. Martha losing sleep, me checking my blood pressure twice a day. But here's where Brenda miscalculated. Engineers are meticulous. Every threat, every smear, every act of vandalism went into my growing file. The same file now in the hands of the EPA, the Colorado Attorney General, and environmental groups, treating this like the Exxon Valdez of suburban creeks. Sarah Olivia, a third-year environmental law student, had taken my case as her senior thesis. She unearthed something explosive while combing through HOA records, inflated contracts tied to Brenda's real estate allies. "Mr. Brennan," she said, spreading papers across my workbench, "this project cost $127,000. It should have been $40,000 tops. The rest was funneled through fake consulting fees and emergency premiums to companies owned by Brenda's associates. It got worse. Secret board meetings, no competitive bidding, HOA funds weaponized for personal vendettas. What started as an environmental crime was starting to look like organized fraud." Meanwhile, in my grandfather's archives, I found his 1973 consulting report, a prophetic warning against exactly this kind of concrete channeling. His calculations showed it would triple downstream flood risk during spring runoff. Brenda hadn't solved a flooding problem. She'd built a hydraulic time bomb. Spring melt was 6 weeks away. The concrete channel would blast water straight at the HOA foundations, while my upstream property stayed dry. I did the math over a weekend, terrifying, perfect math. The HOA's million-dollar basements were about to take on water like sieves. Edwin stopped by Sunday night. "Dale, this woman, big mistake," he said, as I studied weather predictions showing heavy snowpack. I just smiled. "She built the world's most expensive lawsuit," I told him. Weeks later, Sarah arrived with a banker's box full of documents. "You'll want to sit for this," she said. Her forensic accounting had revealed $87,000 skimmed off the creek project, routed through shell companies with familiar names: Hartwell Property Consulting, Willowbrook Environmental Solutions. Then Edwin walked in with his own gift, a recording of the board meeting, where Brenda admitted the real plan: use HOA funds to push out undesirable residents and erase all traces of the community's rural heritage to boost real estate prices. And then the final blow, my grandfather's 1973 hydrology report showing that not only was concrete channeling a flood risk, but the downstream development sat squarely in the natural overflow zone. My land was safely above it. Brenda had stolen nearly $90,000 from her neighbors to build a flood machine aimed at their homes, all while thinking she'd beaten me. Sarah gathered the evidence into neat stacks. This is conspiracy, fraud, environmental destruction, and maybe even racketeering, she said. The EPA violations alone could land her in federal prison. With the added weight of financial crimes, she was now staring down some very serious prison time. Martha came over for coffee, poring over the files with that meticulous, pattern-seeking gaze every good teacher develops. She admitted softly that she'd essentially trapped herself. Each move she made to hurt us had only piled up more proof against her. Outside, February's snow was vanishing faster than normal, and Cottonwood Creek swelled high inside its concrete cage. Forecasts were predicting the most severe spring runoff in 2 decades. Brenda had built her own time bomb, and then handed me the very evidence that would condemn her when it went off. The only thing I hadn't decided yet was whether to warn her neighbors about what was coming, or let nature prove the lesson my grandfather's engineering foresaw half a century ago. My workshop had shifted from a motorcycle restoration haven into something that looked like a thriller command center designed by overzealous engineers. Maps, legal briefs, financial ledgers, and my grandfather's old technical drawings covered every flat surface. The coffee pot never stopped. The landline never rested. Martha began bringing trays of sandwiches to feed the steady parade of allies. Filing through the door, in the corner, sat my freshly restored 1972 Harley Sportster, a resurrection from scrap, and a fitting symbol for what we aimed to do with the creek. Kate Morrison, an environmental attorney from the University of Colorado's legal clinic, officially took on my case for free. After reviewing Sarah's financial evidence, Kate was the type of lawyer who preferred battling polluters to chasing ambulances, and she approached environmental law like a chess grandmaster nursing a long-standing grudge. "Dale," she said, spreading a case timeline across my workbench, "we're not just fighting one case. We're waging 4 at once, and we'll win all of them." The strategy was brilliant in its interlocking design. Federal Clean Water Act violations and unauthorized destruction of habitat. State water rights infringement and fraudulent environmental permits. County building code breaches and illegal special assessments. Civil fraud, conspiracy, racketeering, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Each case reinforced the others like intersecting lines of fire. Even if Brenda managed to win one, the other 3 would destroy her, and with the private attorney general doctrine on our side, we could recover legal costs if victorious. Environmental law actually encouraged citizens to sue when regulators couldn't keep pace. The financial probe had grown into something both impressive and terrifying. Sarah recruited 2 more law students and a forensic accounting professor, who treated HOA fraud like a challenging riddle. They uncovered that Brenda's inflated contract scheme for landscaping, security, and legal consulting had been running for 3 years, funneling funds back into her network. The total, over $200,000 siphoned from homeowner dues, not just civil fraud, but enough for federal racketeering charges that carried sentences measured in years. Meanwhile, I was sketching out the creek's restoration plan. using my grandfather's original surveys paired with modern engineering methods. The natural channel design would both prevent floods and restore fish habitat, all for about $35,000. Less than half of what Brenda had burned on her concrete monstrosity. Colorado Trout Unlimited pledged $25,000. The Sierra Club chipped in $15,000, and donations flowed in from fishing clubs, environmental organizations, and even remorseful HOA members. We started calling it the Cottonwood Creek Redemption Project. The movement began to run on its own momentum. Weekly gatherings in my workshop drew 30 to 40 people, including veterans who liked seeing a combat engineer's grandson take on bureaucratic foolishness. Martha ran the social media effort, Save Cottonwood Creek. Hats gained over 5,000 followers. Dr. Angela Rodriguez, from Colorado State's Environmental Engineering Department, volunteered as our expert witness. She reviewed my grandfather's 1973 notes and confirmed them with modern modeling. The concrete channel increased flood risk by 400% during peak runoff, funneling the torrent directly toward HOA home foundations. Your grandfather was decades ahead of his time, she told me, studying his hand-drawn diagrams. This is exactly how we design natural flood systems today. The media work was coordinated through Kate's office. Local outlets loved the David and Goliath angle, but we kept the message focused on environmental protection, not personal vendetta. Soon, the story was in environmental law blogs, fishing magazines, even drawing a documentary crew from Denver Public Television. Still, our sharpest weapon was my grandfather's historical archive. His mid-century photographs clearly showed the creek safely managing floods for decades without harming property. In court, these would prove concrete created the danger rather than eliminating it. The forecasts matched our fears. Heavy snowpack, unusually warm spring temperatures, and multiple storms aimed right at peak melt. The channel was heading toward its first real trial and would fail spectacularly. Edwin Kowalski, now our inside man, reported on HOA board meetings unraveling under panic. 3 members had quit, saying they were misled about the legality of the project. The clock was ticking. The EPA launched a formal federal probe. The county DA announced a criminal investigation into HOA finances. The state environmental agency issued emergency cease and desist orders. Class action suits popped up from other HOAs across Colorado. Martha and I walked the damaged creek each evening, imagining its rebirth. The water strained against its man-made prison. The air smelled faintly of curing concrete. It was hideous, but temporary. How soon before we can bring it back? She asked. I factored in floods, legal schedules, and construction timeline. By next spring, I told her, more beautiful than he ever imagined. Assuming we get through this one first. Desperation has its own scent, a mix of cheap air freshener, nervous sweat, and the acrid temps of burning bridges. That's exactly what filled Brenda's real estate office at 6:47 a.m. on March 3rd when she called me for what felt less like a meeting and more like a hostage negotiation. Dale, she said, sliding an envelope across her glass desk. I've been thinking about our situation. Maybe we can find something that works for both of us. Inside was a cashier's check for $750,000 and a gag order that could have been drafted by the CIA. The terms: take the money, leave Colorado, transfer my water rights to an HOA-managed conservation trust, and never speak publicly about creek restoration, environmental law, or HOA governance again. The threat underneath was thinly veiled. Legal fights ruin families. She suggested Martha's teaching career might not survive if the school board learned about her husband's radical environmental activism. I'd brought my digital recorder, legal in Colorado, and her next words were pure gold for prosecutors. If you don't take this final offer, I'll make sure every contractor, every supplier, every business owner here knows your trouble, that you cost people money, your wife's tutoring business, your bike hobby, your reputation, gone. I have connections you can't even imagine. That night, my workshop was hit again. This time, it was a message, not theft. My Harley was knocked over, its frame bent, 40 hours of work ruined. My grandfather's notebooks were scattered, pages torn. Others soaked in motor oil, but they'd made one critical mistake. My new security system caught it all in crystal clear video, 2 hooded figures wrecking the place before climbing into a white Tesla with unforgettable vanity plates. One wore $300 sneakers I'd seen on Brenda's teenage son. The harassment escalated into corporate thriller territory. Anonymous online reviews trashed Martha's business with lies about politics, safety, and professionalism. Fake accounts spread rumors I'd been dishonorably discharged for mental instability and hostility toward authority. The school principal called Martha in over concerns about me. Parents cancelled tutoring after anonymous letters labeled me a dangerous extremist. What Brenda didn't understand was that engineers log everything. Every threat, smear, and act of vandalism went into files that could impress federal investigators. Which is exactly what they became. The FBI's white-collar crime unit opened a case on HOA fraud. The EPA's criminal division began building charges over environmental violations. Sarah's accounting had given them a precise roadmap to the $200,000 in stolen funds. Brenda's composure cracked. Edwin reported shouting matches at board meetings. 2 more members quit, leaving only her and a single ally running a subdivision in chaos. Meanwhile, March was unseasonably warm, 15 degrees above normal, and the National Weather Service issued flood watches. The creek was already running at 150% of its usual flow, with 6 weeks until peak melt. My measurements confirmed my grandfather's warnings. Instead of dispersing the water, the concrete was channeling it into a high-pressure stream, aimed straight at the houses. Dr. Rodriguez's models showed that peak conditions would create water speeds capable of undermining foundations. Insurance companies were already asking about unapproved changes to drainage. Changes that could void flood coverage entirely. Support exploded. Businesses hung support Dale signs. The high school environmental club adopted the creek project. Veterans rallied behind me, and regional groups made my fight a banner cause against HOA overreach. But Brenda wasn't done. Edwin tipped me that she might try something drastic at the next board meeting. Maybe armed security, maybe a restraining order labeling me a danger. That night, Martha found me bent over flood models and snowpack reports. "How bad will it be?" she asked. I studied the data and maps, tracing the water's inevitable path. "Bad enough to end this," I said, "one way or another." The call came at 5:23 a.m. on March 15th. Edwin's voice was low, like he was passing secrets to a spy. "You should know, Brenda's loading a moving truck. Big one, in the middle of the night. Something's up." I threw on clothes and drove past her place just as sunrise hit the peaks. Sure enough, a commercial moving truck was in the driveway, her Tesla already packed, and movers loading expensive furniture under her watchful eye. The woman who'd spent half a year trying to push me out of the valley had apparently decided it was time to make her own tactical withdrawal, though not without one last move that was either a stroke of genius or total lunacy, probably a bit of both. About an hour later, Sarah Olivia called with news that made my coffee taste like it had been brewed with car batteries. "Mr. Brennan," she said, "Brenda just filed for an emergency restraining order. She's claiming you've been stalking her family and making terrorist threats against HOA property. She's also asking for federal protection under anti-domestic terrorism laws." The court documents were a masterclass in fictional creativity. In her sworn affidavit, Brenda painted me as a disgruntled military veteran with documented anger issues, who'd been spying on HOA families and threatening to sabotage community infrastructure. She'd even attached photos of me taking water flow measurements presented as evidence of suspicious reconnaissance. The restraining order hearing was set for the exact day of the Peak Springs stuttle. Either a wild coincidence, or Brenda knew exactly how close she was to being exposed. That afternoon unfolded with a kind of precise coordination you'd expect from a military op. If military ops involved environmental lawyers, forensic accountants, and fish biologists with a grudge. Kate Morrison showed up with a legal brief thick enough to stop a bullet. Dr. Rodriguez arrived with real-time flood models that made your stomach sink just looking at them. "Dale," Kate said, spreading papers across my kitchen table, "she's trying to stall the legal process until after the flood season. If she gets that restraining order keeping you away from the creek during the flood, there'll be no witnesses to document what happens to those houses." By then, the Weather Service had upgraded the situation to a flash flood warning. Snowpack in the mountains was melting far faster than expected, and multiple storm fronts were lining up to hit Colorado at the worst possible time. Cottonwood Creek was already at double its normal flow days before the peak. But Brenda had overlooked one fatal flaw in her plan. The restraining order meant she'd have to show up in federal court and testify under oath, which meant explaining her surveillance claims, while the prosecution had her on tape offering bribes and threatening witnesses. Agent Park from the FBI had been quietly tracing her financial trail for weeks, uncovering nearly $200,000 embezzled from HOA funds through shady contracts and kickbacks. Add in the bribery, witness intimidation, and environmental violations, and she was looking at serious federal time. The night before the hearing, I sat in my workshop cleaning my grandfather's service revolver, not because I expected trouble, but because certain rituals help clear the mind. The creek outside was roaring now, snowmelt turning its concrete prison into a high-pressure cannon aimed at million-dollar foundations. Martha found me at midnight, hunched over flood projections by lamplight. "Tomorrow changes everything, doesn't it?" she asked. "One way or another," I said, listening to the water strain against its concrete restraints. "Either the law works, or physics will teach the lesson." By now, the media storm was in full swing. Denver stations planned live coverage of both the hearing and the flood. Environmental law blogs had turned my case into a rallying cry against HOA overreach. The hashtag #ConcreteVSNature was trending nationally. Sarah had discovered Brenda's family had already bought a home in Florida. Bank records showed liquidated investments, closed accounts, and asset transfers, a financial escape plan in motion. She was essentially fleeing the state, while accusing me of terrorism. That evening, Edwin dropped by with intel from the last HOA board meeting. Only Brenda and one loyal ally showed up. While furious homeowners demanded answers about flood insurance, liability, and voided warranties, several had already filed lawsuits over unauthorized modifications. "Dale," Edwin said, "she's managed to turn everyone against her Ivan people who voted for the concrete project. They see now she lied to them." The irony couldn't have been sharper. Brenda had spent months trying to turn the community against me. But her greed had isolated her completely. The next day, federal court would decide if environmental law could shield citizens from HOA abuse. But nature wasn't going to wait for a ruling. The Denver Federal Courthouse was packed on March 22, standing room only, with overflow crowds watching the live stream in the lobby. Outside, reporters jostled for space, while inside, Judge Martha Blackwood, known for her tough stance on environmental cases, presided over what local media had dubbed the Creek War. Half the gallery was filled with environmental groups. Another section held veterans organizations. The rest belonged to local families fighting their own HOA battles. Outside, Cottonwood Creek surged toward dangerous levels. Inside, Brenda Hartwell was about to find out that karma accrues interest. Kate's opening statement cut like a scalpel. Your Honor, this case is about the systematic destruction of a century-old ecosystem to satisfy one woman's vendetta against a neighbor who wouldn't bend to her will. She didn't just break environmental law, she stole nearly $200,000 from her own community to do it. Brenda's lawyer, a jittery associate from Petton and Associates, tried to frame me as a radical environmentalist, blocking necessary flood control. His voice cracked as he insisted the concrete channel was approved by qualified contractors. Then Kate played the recordings. Brenda's voice filled the courtroom, offering bribes, threatening Martha's career. Gasps rippled through the gallery when the secret HOA meeting audio revealed her real motive: driving out undesirable residents to raise property values for her real estate ventures. Your Honor, Kate said, the defendant's own words prove this was never about flood control. This was about using HOA power for ethnic and economic cleansing. My testimony was simple: 3 decades of flood control experience explained so anyone could follow. I showed the judge my grandfather's 1973 engineering report predicting exactly what would happen if concrete replaced natural flood absorption. Computer models demonstrated the channel's role in sending quadruple the water toward HOA homes during peak flow. But the moment that shifted the entire case came when Dr. Rodriguez presented live flood data. Your Honor, he said, this channel has created an immediate public safety hazard. Right now, water velocity is reaching levels that can undermine home foundations. The judge called a recess when the National Weather Service issued a flash flood emergency. When court resumed, Brenda looked like she'd seen a ghost. Her lawyer kept checking his phone, probably getting updates from the disaster she'd engineered. Kate seized the moment. Your Honor, while we've been in session, the defendant's channel has begun flooding the very homes it was meant to protect. Meanwhile, Mr. Brennan's upstream property remains completely dry. Live aerial footage confirmed it water pooled behind Brenda's concrete bottleneck, drowning basements in Willowbrook Estates. While my workshop sat untouched, Brenda's public meltdown was caught on every camera in the room. She accused me of weaponizing the weather and demanded federal protection from my supposed eco-terrorist plot. Judge Blackwood had had enough. Miss Hartwell, control yourself or be held in contempt. This court has heard enough. By lunch, FBI agents were executing new warrants, EPA officers were sealing off the concrete sites, and the Colorado Attorney General's office had arrived with evidence of statewide HOA fraud. The afternoon verdict was decisive. Brenda lost on every count: Clean Water Act violations, fraud, conspiracy, water rights infringement, and intentional emotional distress. The judge ordered all concrete removed, the creek restored, and $750,000 in damages paid plus a landmark. ruling limiting HOA authority over waterways. That evening felt like a victory party. Environmental lawyers called it historic. Veterans groups handed me a community service award. High school students gave Martha handmade thank you cards. But for me, the real win was standing on my back porch with Martha, listening to the creek run free again. Justice, she said, sounds like running water. 6 months later, you wouldn't recognize Cottonwood Creek. The concrete prison was gone, replaced by a meandering natural channel lined with willows and wildflowers. Trout had returned to spawn. Former HOA members, even some who once backed Brenda, showed up with tools to help the restoration. The change rippled outward. Colorado passed Dale's Law, strengthening property rights and requiring environmental studies before altering waterways. Law schools now teach Brennan v. Hartwell as a model case. The $750,000 judgment restored the creek, paid legal costs, and funded the William Brennan Environmental Engineering Scholarship at Colorado State. The first recipient, Sarah Olivia, now an EPA enforcement attorney. Brenda pleaded guilty to fraud, served 18 months in federal prison, lost her real estate license, and had her assets seized. Her family now lives quietly in Florida. The concrete company owner got 2 years and $2 million in fines. 3 former HOA board members received probation and mandatory creek restoration work. Edwin was unanimously elected HOA president and implemented strict environmental review rules. Willowbrook transformed from a gated collection of strangers into a real neighborhood. Our annual Creek Festival draws thousands. My workshop is back to fixing vintage motorcycles and teaching kids about engines, water flow, and standing up to bullies. Martha's new science curriculum incorporates watershed protection, and her students have won awards for creek restoration projects. Federal agencies now use our case as a training example for citizen environmental enforcement. Just last week, I got a call from a homeowner in Arizona facing the same battle. Listening to her story, I realized this fight is bigger than one creek. Martha and I are considering turning the workshop into a resource center for communities like hers. For now, though, it's enough to sit on the porch at sunset, listening to grandfather's creek sing, while Martha reads letters from supporters across the country. Home isn't just where you live, it's where your values are defended and your community thrives. So here's my challenge. If you've got an HOA nightmare brewing, share it in the comments. You might be surprised how many legal tools you have when petty tyrants threaten something beautiful. And don't forget to subscribe next week. We cover the HOA that tried to ban vegetable gardens and the grandmother who fought back with the Constitution and won. Sometimes the best revenge is patience, preparation, and letting nature take back what's hers. Thanks for joining us here on HOA Stories, where the bullies finally get checked. If you liked today's showdown, hit like, drop your favorite moment in the comments, and subscribe so you won't miss the next battle.